So I'm going to direct the next set of questions to Professor Jayasimi. Again, I'm just resetting the room to say welcome if you've just joined us. We're continuing the Q&A and it's on COVID-19 concerns. My next question is to Professor Jayasimi, and it's two questions together because I think you can handle them. So the first one says, I heard the virus affects pregnancies, getting pregnant, is this true? And then there's another one that says, what would you say to someone who wouldn't take the vaccine because they believe it's an experimental drug and depending on the manufacturer contains aborted fetus matter? Is there any truth in this? So is there any fetal matter in the vaccines that we have already? And also, does it affect pregnancy, fertility, that sort of a thing?
Thank you for that question. I think it's relevant. I will start off by saying uh, for people to have concerns, whether we're professionals or members of the public, is okay. What we have to do as individuals is to make sure we acquire the knowledge and education. And that is why we're here this evening. With regards to pregnancy or fertility, the traditional definition of being infertile or subfertile is if you've been trying for a pregnancy, having intimacy 3 to 4 times a week, and you haven't succeeded after 12 months. The vaccine has only been around for about 3 months, so there's no way anybody can say it affects fertility. It doesn't affect fertility. If anything, a paper was published in the last few days from China that shows that people who had COVID-19, the infection did affect the quality of their sperm. Whether it's going to be permanent or reversible, as scientists are still looking at that. So the vaccine doesn't affect fertility. It does not cause erectile dysfunction. I think the second part of your question, I do know about, when I say I do know, I've read about the Pfizer vaccine. It does not contain aborted fetus or even any fetal material. Now, vaccines have been around for a very long time, and you have what you call cell lines. Uh, Once you develop a cell line, you can store it and use that. If you read the AstraZeneca uh, SPC paper, there's reference to fetal material in it, but it is not aborted fetus. It could have been from a miscarriage, and we're going back decades. Well, the cell lines we're talking about. I mean, I've got to be honest. Previously, I would have answered to that question that, oh no, there are no fetal cells. But if you go to the AstraZeneca product information, it does say there are cell lines, but they are not from aborted fetuses. That's the way I will answer that. And there are so many things we use in medicine, both bone marrow transplant, getting stem cells from the cord of a newborn baby, and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's not aborted fetus. Uh, it doesn't affect fertility. You can use it in pregnancy. You can use it in breastfeeding mothers. But the advice we give is that have that discussion with your GP if you're pregnant or if you're breastfeeding. Again, just like Obechika said, it's a risk benefit analysis. If you're at higher risk of getting it, then you get the vaccine. If you think non pharmaceutical interventions are okay and that you'd rather not take the vaccine, then fair enough.
Thank you so much. I'm also going to just call on Dr. Oyenkuru to just add a little bit more to that in terms of the risks, fertility, pregnancy, that sort of thing. Is that all right?
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, and thank you for Professor Jayasimi. That's really informative, and helping us to understand, the concerns and the risk benefits. So I'm going to come at this from a GP perspective, and for somebody who's taken the vaccination myself, I've had my 2 vaccine doses, and I had the Pfizer vaccine. So, I'm not telling people to do what I haven't done myself. And I was just privileged. I ran a vaccination clinic yesterday morning, so I was at work all morning. And so the question around vaccination in pregnancy, childbirth, and in pregnant and women of childbearing age actually has come up again, and it's come to the fore. Now, so far, the safety data so far has not shown that there is any real side effect to having the vaccination. And I think for women who are pregnant or are hoping to get pregnant or who are breastfeeding, the studies have shown that the effect so far in pregnant women is not higher than it is in the normal population. But if you're a pregnant woman and you have underlying health conditions, then your risk then rises. Your risk of complications of COVID, poor outcomes with COVID, hospitalization with COVID rises because of those secondary conditions. And so for that particular group, as it stands right now, and that's information from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, is not to say you must have it, but it is to say have that discussion. And what you want to, the panelists have said so far, is what you're trying to do is to try and reduce your risk of not just hospitalization. And we know that, that the COVID vaccine far in the UK, we have so far just the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca, the Oxford AstraZeneca. We can see every day as we look at the news on the information coming on the news that hospitalizations are dropping, infection rates are dropping, and one of the great things about the vaccination program is that there is a reduction in the severity of disease, and really that's really what we're trying to reduce people not just getting it and spreading it, but also if they go into hospital having severe disease. So far, there haven't been any real data to prove that they are unsafe, and there are studies going on. And so we are beginning to give the COVID-19 vaccinations to women who are pregnant, who do definitely have and who are breastfeeding, who have underlying conditions. So please always have that option. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Yankiru. I think basically what we can summarize from all of that is that when you have underlying health conditions, you have to take that on board because that increases your risk. Also, from what Professor Jayasimi said and what Dr. Yankiru said, we know that it doesn't affect fertility, it doesn't cause erectile dysfunction, and it's also not affecting pregnancy. So the sort of advice and the recommendation at the moment is that if you're in that category, if you're worried about fertility or if you're pregnant, the guideline is that you can have it and it's safe. Okay, I'm just going to set the room again and just welcome everyone that's joined us while we've been speaking. We have 3 speakers in the house. We've got Dr. Oge Alozie, Professor Jayasimi, and we've also got Dr. Yankiru, and they're answering the questions as we're going along. If you haven't typed your questions into the chat, please do so. We will collect all these questions and we will be trying our best to answer them to the best of our ability. Please know that when we're doing this as a voluntary event, it's run by AfroGP Hearts and Birds, and really what we're wanting to do here is just give you the information that you need so that you're empowered to make your informed decision around the COVID vaccination. So I'm going to direct the next question to Dr. Alozie, and this question is more towards Africa. The question is asking if the plan with the COVID vaccination is to depopulate Africa. So there's a lot of concerns around the Black community taking the vaccination because they think, one, that the vaccine that they're being given is different from what other people are having. Also, do they have a choice? Can they choose which vaccination to have? But is this plan to give us a different vaccine so that it can depopulate Africa in general? Over to you.
I'm taking deep breaths because I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, See, here's the thing. At a point in time, I think one of the failures that we've had in communication and messaging across this whole pandemic is the engaging with fringe concepts, right? Concepts that don't make sense in the context of what you went to medical school with, multiple people on this call I went to medical school with, and then our extended training. If that was truly the case, we get grains from the USDA in many parts of Western, Southern, and Central Africa. We get a host of things that are imported. Let's focus on Nigeria specifically. Nigeria imports 75% of all its food, right? If a country really wanted to depopulate us, all they need to do is either cut off our food supply or put something in our Indomie or our Fanta. It would have been a wrap by now, right? So we need to not engage in people that have those kind of questions, right? I mean, here's the reality. That is not a reality question. Nobody is trying to depopulate us. So I'm going to stop that there. I think the second level of question is, do you get a choice? The reality is no. There's not enough vaccine to have a choice, right? Even here in the United States, where we had Moderna and Pfizer in multiple of the hospitals that I round at, we didn't have a choice. It was, hey, you show up on Monday. If it's Moderna, you get Moderna. If it's Pfizer, you get Pfizer. This is not a shopping experience. This is not Amazon.com. This is not, I mean, again, I think we need people to understand that if you are prepared and ready to get vaccine and they call your number, please take the vaccine. I think the scientific questions are great. The concerns about health and side effects and pregnancy and a host of other things are great. But the depopulation conspiracies and the 5G and the Bill Gates, when those questions come up, let's just put them in the trash and move on and have a reasonable conversation amongst reasonable people.
Thank you so much. So basically, I'm sort of gleaning from what you're saying that no, this is not a ploy to depopulate us in Africa. This is probably one of the myths or the conspiracy theories, which safely we can say that that's not the case. And like I said earlier on, I have had my vaccine. I had the AstraZeneca one, which is also the Oxford vaccine. I don't feel any different from any of my colleagues who have had similar vaccination. And when I went in to have my vaccination, I had it with my colleagues that I work with. It was drawn out of the same bottle. So it wasn't a completely different vaccine that was being given to me. I'm going to direct the next question to Professor Jaisimi. And the next question really is, why aren't the predicted high mortality rates in Africa occurring? So why aren't people dying as much in Africa? Why did we have more deaths in the States? Why did we have more in the UK? Why is Africa not having the same experience?
There's no one direct answer to that question. At the beginning of the pandemic, using modeling statistics and the weak health system in Africa, people were of the opinion that when the virus gets to Africa, it's going to ravage through the continent. But it hasn't happened. One could put this down to the demography of Africa. And I use Nigeria as an example because that's the one I know of particularly. Over 50% of Nigerians are under the age of 20. And that's not to say that they don't get the virus, but they don't become seriously ill. They don't have underlying conditions such as diabetes, obesity, and the likes of hypertension and other comorbidities. And perhaps that is one of the saving grace for Africa, is that we have a young population. Now, again, we are not testing enough. So we don't really have accurate data as to the figures coming out of Africa. But definitely, it's not as high as what is happening in the West. Again, we tend not to live in multi-generational communities where you have three generations living under one roof. Again, that might have been one of the reasons why We haven't got the high numbers in Africa. But if I were to put a finger on the bottom, I will say is the young population that we've got in Africa that has held us this far. In that, yes, they do get the infection, they get the virus, but they're okay. They ward it off. I give myself, I mean, I'm not under 20, but I give myself as an example. I've had the infection. I had the infection, and when I did get it, it felt like malaria. I had a fever, I had bone pain, and I didn't have to, thank God I didn't have to go into a hospital. Yes, I took my paracetamol, I hydrated myself, I took my bed rest, and I survived it. So if at my age I could do that, mount my own natural defense against it, what do you expect of the younger people? They're more immune, they're stronger. And I think that's what's going on in Africa. But we've got to also look at genomics that we haven't explored. We don't have an answer to that. Is there something in the African gene that protects us from the infection? There are people who have alluded to the fact that as young people in Africa growing up, we had the BCG vaccination, we had all sorts of vaccinations, such that maybe our body has now been able to mount an immune response to viruses. But I think it's more demography, underreporting perhaps, and maybe genomics. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I totally agree that we probably have a lot more underreporting in Africa. And actually, when I was planning for this session and I was trying to do some research around the numbers in Nigeria, for example, I wasn't able to find any information that could tell me how many people have tested. It was just different numbers. I couldn't really sort of come to the conclusion of a particular, total number of people that have had it. Neither could I come up with a number of how many people have died from having the COVID infection. And remember that also, if you're not based within the city, that information is less likely to be reported because they probably won't even have been tested at all for us to know if it was COVID that they died of. So I think the numbers might be a bit more ambiguous for us in Africa, but the fact remains that people are getting COVID in Africa and people are dying from it. And that is the reality. I'm just going to go on with the questions now to ask Dr. Oyinkiru. Will the new vaccine development platforms, such as mRNA, viral vectors, have any application post-COVID for vaccines that are already in existence? So would what we're doing now with the new development that's been used in making the COVID vaccines, will these be employed in vaccines that we have already? So are they going to change how they're doing things, or are they going to start releasing completely new vaccinations based on this new development? What do you think?
Right, thank you so much for that question. So from my understanding as a GP, there is none of the vaccination technologies used in any of the vaccinations is absolutely new. They have been used in other conditions, previously. So they've been used for Ebola, they've been used for the MERS, the SARS. So there isn't any real vaccination technology that is absolutely new. The newer of the vaccination technologies is actually the one for the Pfizer one, which is the mRNA vaccination technology. That is the newer of all the vaccination technologies, and so that is the newer technology. But even that's not new. I think they've been around for many years already. And they have been deployed successfully in bringing down infection rates in different diseases. So, for example, for Ebola, for the MERS, the SARS, it's actually the DNA is what is used in the flu virus that we have the flu vaccine that we have every year. So I'm not aware, and I haven't seen any studies to show that there is any new vaccination technology, and what I think is going to be an extension of what is done already. But having said that, I think one of the great things about the COVID-19, which is one of the things that probably leads into the concern that people have that the vaccination was developed, overnight and it was rushed through, is that, the vaccination technologies were scaled up because of the international need to be able to find a cure, to be able to find a pathway out of the COVID pandemic. And so where normally there would have been little silos or little groups of people doing vaccination work, doing vaccination technology work on their own, they, governments and companies and, have come together. And I was just looking at this, and there are nothing less than at least 20 to 30 vaccination trials going on currently around the world. So they're using all of the technology that is available and being trialed on lots of different groups of people. So even, normally in most of the trial data, Africans and Afro-Caribbeans tend to be excluded, either because we don't come forward or because of historically, the fact that, not all of these trials have been done exactly the same way. But in this particular COVID-19, I'm looking at all of the data. So for the Pfizer, it was, it was done in 6 to 7 countries, including South Africa, in the Oxford one, there was 44,000 people across 8 nations. So that, there is a lot of work that's gone on in this particular pandemic, with a lot of collaboration that you wouldn't see. And I think that's one of the reasons why, not only have the vaccination technology been able to be scaled up, but also that's why it's so widely available. And there are so many more vaccination are actually coming through. There are a lot more trials being done on lots of other vaccines across different nations across the world. So I hope that's gone in some way to answer your question.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think that's probably also the benefit of, everyone working together, everyone pulling together, in the sense that things have been sped up. So things have happened quite quickly. Also, that new information in how things have been done so quickly can then be carried forward for other vaccines. So potentially we would see a change in some of the ways that things are being done. But yeah, I think I totally agree with you that, it's just been fantastic how the different pharmaceutical companies have come together and brought out the vaccines as quickly as they have. I've got another question, and this one would be for Dr. Alozie, that what is the difference between the natural immunity you get from getting COVID-19 and getting vaccinated?
Yeah, great question. I will make one little sort of addendum. So the mRNA vaccines, these are the first 2 times that they've been used in human history. They've been tried other places. I think it's important not just to call out the pharmaceutical companies, but also remember that the governments, this is not a political thing, but whatever side of the aisle you're on, this wouldn't have happened if the governments had not put the billions of dollars into it. And what people need to understand is that typically in phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, what slows them down is not the trial, it's the money, right? The companies have to go and source for $250 million after a phase 1, $300 million after a phase 2, and then another. And so the fact that they could do that in parallel with the assurance that, number one, they were going to get paid, and number 2, they could produce after phase 2 with the assurance that whatever happened, they were going to get their money. Because at the end of the day, there's no mission without money. And that's really what drove that. And so I think that just needs to be called out. What is also exciting, though, is that now that people know that mRNA vaccines can work, like Pearl said, there's a host of companies that are working on cancer vaccines. There's a malaria vaccine project that's ongoing, and it's super exciting preliminary data that came out this week with mRNA vaccines. And so that's going to be super crazy if that actually happens. That's a game changer for Africa. Back to your specific question around immunity and immunogenicity. How much immunity do you develop based on natural infection versus vaccine-driven infection? And what's really clear now, there's multiple studies. There's one that just came out of Harvard, I think on Thursday, and it shows very clearly that people with native infection or natural infection, you got it from your cousin or your friend, is lower than people that get the vaccine. And not only that, like Dr. Jaisami said, if you've been infected and get shot 1, your immunity is 10 times what somebody that's never been infected and get shot one is, right? So there is an exciting sort of, wow, maybe from an equity standpoint, as we go forward into this COVID vaccination process, if you've already been infected, you may not need two shots, right? We are using the two shots because that is what the registration process came out with. But very soon, I think you may start to have a conversation, especially now that J&J has one shot, and all these other companies are going to struggle and say, we have all this vaccine, but if these guys can get it in one shot, that's where it's going to go for the rest of the world and for some other European and Asian countries. And so that's really what I think is going to happen. And that's why it's important, whether you've had it or not, get your vaccination. I think that's truly the take home for that.
Okay, I'm just going to let Professor Jaisimi also make a comment. I think you raised your hand, you wanted to speak. Is that all?
Yes, I think for want of being accused, when I say being accused, the panelists, of all being pro-vaccine, one has got to address the issue of the mRNA vaccination. What Dr. Alozie has said is correct. Government and the public sector or the private sector have come together. The bureaucracy of approval has been dealt away with, and that's why we're having emergency authorization use. That's how we have been able to get to where we are in such a quick time. But when we talk about mRNA vaccine, people say that's what's going to change your DNA. And I've seen it in the chat. Somebody has said the mRNA vaccine has been, or technology, I use the word technology, has been in existence before COVID. There is a condition in which there's high fat in the body, hyperlipidemia. And there is a drug already in the market, pre-COVID, that uses the technology of mRNA. mRNA technology has been around for 10 to 15 years. It was not developed by Pfizer. It was developed by a small outfit of scientists. Pfizer coming on board is because they're a bigger company, and when it comes to marketing, then they'll be able to do that. So that was what I was going to say. The mRNA technology did not just start. People have been working on it for 10 to 15 years. And just to mention pregnancy again, I'm sorry to bring you back. Just to say that recently the vaccine is going to be tested in trials in pregnant women, in young women. Previously, we never did that. And I'm sure it's because of the safety profile after 300 million people being vaccinated that's given people that confidence to say, yes, we're going to do a trial on people who are pregnant. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Jaisimi. The next question is actually also for you, in the sense that we want to know if the vitamin D that we get from sunlight in Africa is what's helping to reduce the incidence or the prevalence of the COVID infection in Africa.
Well, I mean, the answer to that is we don't know. Until you undertake randomized control trials, you cannot make a categorical statement about that. Yes, we do know that in Africa, the sun helps us convert or make vitamin D, whereas in the West, we people of color, we are vitamin D deficient. What does vitamin D do? Yes, it does boost our immunity, but one cannot categorically say, oh, it's because of the vitamin D in Africa that people are not getting the COVID infection. There are people dying in Africa, not because they are vitamin D deficient, perhaps because they have, even young people are now dying from the variants. So it's not one story. It's not one storyline. There are various lines to all of this. It's like a jigsaw, and we're trying to put the jigsaw puzzle together. So vitamin D probably plays a role. I was on vitamin D before when I got my COVID, when I got the infection. Maybe that's what helped me. I don't know. But again, just to share personal experience, if somebody had told me that I would be vitamin D deficient as an individual, I would say that's not possible. But a colleague of mine, out of something else, said, "Well, why don't we check your vitamin D level?" And it came back as I being severely deficient, not just deficient, severely deficient in vitamin D. So our melanin in the West uh, makes us prone to the deficiency. Whether it's held in Africa, unless we in Africa undertake that trial, then we cannot categorically say yes to that question. I think it's contributory, but I will not say uh, for certainty, or it's only vitamin D that has protected Africans from the infection.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm just going to ask a question now from Dr. Oyenkiro. What's your advice for someone who's just finished their cancer treatment late 2020 in terms of taking the vaccine? And I think maybe all of you might want to just touch on this a bit, just to sort of just encourage the person that's asked the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Like I said, the vaccination, we know that COVID is real. It's a quite a nasty disease, and one thing we haven't talked about is long COVID. So not just getting the infection and surviving it, it's the risk of infection and death, and it's in the risk of infection and long-term sequelae. So we know that there are, so people who have an ongoing problem after they've had COVID. What studies have shown so far is that patients who are immune suppressed or who have a low immunity, so for example your cancer patients who have underlying health conditions like diabetes or who have obesity, those groups of people, and there are lots of other groups, respiratory conditions, asthma, breathing problems from excessive smoking. We know that these groups have a much higher risk of, irrespective of age now, of getting severe COVID, becoming unwell, dying, and even having long COVID, that is COVID after ongoing sequelae or ongoing problems, even when they've recovered from COVID. So my advice to that person is, every vaccination program is in aim to mitigate the risk of getting the infection, or if you get the infection, of getting it, getting severe infection. And so if somebody has had cancer or falls into any of these other groups, then the whole essence would be get the vaccination, really to try and protect yourself from getting the disease, or if you get the disease, from getting it and getting a bad form of it. So that really is my advice. And that is the advice from the government, is if you've had cancer or you're on cancer treatment, or you have anything that's going to suppress your immune system, is really because if you get the disease, then your body it's much more difficult to be able to fight it off. So the guidance is, and that's what the studies are showing, is please go ahead, come forward with confidence, get your vaccination, because that's one way you can protect yourself from becoming unwell. Thank you.
Thank you.